Bishut Harav, I wanted to thank the Rav again for participating in these question and answer sessions and giving up his time. And we hope the Rav is feeling better after last week's illness. We've got a lot of...
Baruch Hashem, I am slowly but surely returning to normal.
Baruch Hashem. We have a number of questions this week on the topics of Shabbat and Kashrut. I think everyone here knows the rules, but the main rule is please stay muted unless I ask you otherwise. So I'm going to begin with the first question, which is from Binyamin Lemkin in Ramat Bet Shemesh. Can one close a drawer of a table if the only way to do so would be to move an object, which is muktzeh?
The topic under discussion here is known as Tiltul Davar Shemelachto Le'isur. So let us imagine we have a drawer, chest of drawers, and the drawer is not able to close properly because, shall we say, a hairdryer or a similar device is sticking out, partly or fully sticking out from the drawer. The halacha with regards to the kli shemelachto le'isur is that it is mutar v'tiltul letzorech gufo or letzorech mekomo. So this is a case of letzorech mekomo. In other words, in order to be able to close this drawer, this thing has to be moved. The actual place, the position that this device is taking up is causing us some difficulty. So we require that space. So it's mutar letaltel. You're allowed to move that thing, letzorech mekomo, for the purpose of utilizing that space or getting it out of your way. When so doing, it is proper to do so al yedei shinui. In other words, you can move it or shift it or push it into the drawer, shall we say, by means of your elbow or the back of your hand or using some other item to shift it along. And when one is allowed to metaltel, to move kli shemelachto le'isur from its current place, because we require its own place, that we require that makom, when it is mutar to do so, you are allowed to, having picked it up or having moved it, you're allowed to place it in a spot that is desirable for you. Nevertheless, it is ra'ui, it is proper not to carry it about for any length of time, but to do so quickly and with expedition.
Thank you, Harav. Benjamin, do you have anything to be clarified there?
No, thank you.
Very good, thank you. The next question is from Baruch in Givat Shmuel. Would moving some dirt, such as earth, on the floor with your foot to a specified corner be a violation of forbidden malachot? How is the halacha different if it is inside, outside, paved or unpaved?
Here we are discussing the concept of something similar to the concept of sweeping a floor. The first thing to know is that if a floor is tiled with stone tiles or ceramic tiles, or it's covered in linoleum or some kind of wooden product like wooden tiles, etc., one is allowed to sweep such a floor on Shabbat because there is no hashash of being mashwe gumoth. In other words, if the floor is untiled, that is to say, it is made of earth, an earthen floor, which was the common floor in most homes in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Talmud, and also for many centuries after that time. In many parts of the world, till fairly recent times, in fact, the average floor, the average home was an earthen floor, beaten earth. So if you have pits and holes and depressions in such a floor, when you sweep the floor and you move the dirt around, what you are likely to do is lahashvot gumot, to even the surface and fill in some of those depressions. So if a floor is untiled, in Hebrew, then if it is not tiled, it is a mahloket, in fact, amongst the Kadmonim, the Bahag, and some other Rishonim say it is mutar, other Rishonim say it is asur. Halakha lema'aseh, if a floor is untiled, if there's an earthenware floor, an earthen floor, not tiled in any way, one should not. It is asur. One should go by the shita that is asur to sweep such a floor on Shabbat. If the floor is tiled, which is usually the case nowadays, in almost all places, then it is mutar to sweep the floor. Now, having said that, if this question is being asked of a tiled floor, but there is a small amount of dirt, earth, in one particular spot on this floor, and you want to shift that dirt to the side, you may do so. You may do so with your foot. You may do so with a broom. Just as we said, you're allowed to sweep the floor because it is tiled. You're also allowed to move that earth on that floor. There's not a problem. It is not considered muktzeh. It is something which is mutar to do on Shabbat. And I think, having said that, we have fully answered that question.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Baruch? I don't see Baruch here, so we'll move on to the next question. This is from David Newman in Shalvim. To what extent does Shema Yitaken Klishir extend? Is it required to clap? When clapping, should one do so with a shinui? And can one drum on a table?
All right. Well, here we have to go into a few details briefly. The Mishnah states in the Talmud Bavli, it is Lamed Waw Amud Bet, it's 36b. The Mishnah speaks about V'lo metapachim, v'lo mesapekin, v'lo merakadin. This is on Yom Tov, and the same applies to Shabbat. The Talmud Bavli here states that these three things, metapachim, mesapekim, and merakdim, are all for the same reason. The reason given in the Talmud here is gezerah shema yitaken kaleshir. All right, so what is the difference, first of all, between these three things? We have tapahim, which means to clap two hands together. That's called the tapah. We have mesapekim, which is lispok yad al yarech, which is to slap one's hand against one's thigh, for example, usually as an expression of anger. And we have merakadim, which is to dance, which does not mean to shuffle, by the way. Here, I must mention the following illustrative ma'aseh, which, to the best of my knowledge, is true, although I was not there. I heard as follows, with regards to Agon Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's itself. He, like many Jews, in the summer would go to the Catskills for vacation. And you had these, what they call bungalow camps or hotels or hostels, where Jews used to go together in large groups. They were run by Jews, they were kosher, etc., etc. And on one occasion, after tefilla on Leil Shabbat, there were many Jews there. Some of them were of a more Hasidic bent, and they began to dance around the bama after tefillah on Leil Shabbat. And someone pulled Rav Moshe Feinstein into the circle, as it were, as they were going around the bama, shuffling around. And a non-Hasidic person who was present, who did not want to get involved because he thought this was dancing, and asur on Shabbat, he said to Rav Moshe, he said, "Mentonisht tanzen of Shabbos, one's not allowed to dance on Shabbat, right?" So he was surprised. He asked Rav Moshe Feinstein, "What's going on? What are you doing?" And his response in Yiddish was, "Ir tanzen, ich gehe." They're dancing, I'm walking. In other words, this is not called dancing. When people hold hands and sort of shuffle around a bama or what have you, that's not dancing. That's not the kind of rikud that Hazal had in mind. Apparently, they had in mind something much more energetic, which involved jumping and leaping and things of that nature. We also see this based on a statement in the Talmud where it talks about dancing, lirkod, barakdim, in order to frighten away birds in an orchard from produce, from fruit. Now, if you just sort of shuffle about gently and not very energetically, the birds probably will not be very perturbed. But if you start flapping about and jumping and leaping about, they will be scared and they will fly away. So that the Talmud states that you're not allowed to do that in order to scare away the birds on Shabbat or Yom Tov. So that's with regards to Merakadim. What is the definition of Rikud? It's not just sort of shuffling around, holding hands. It's Rikud Mamash. It's something which involves physical, extreme physical activity, shall we say. With regards to clapping, which is what the Mishnah states, metapahim. So I quoted the sugya on Daf Lamed as well. That's all the sugya there states. We also have another statement on Daf Lamed in Masechet Besa also, Lamed Amud Aleph, in the Tosafot. דיבור המתחיל, תנן אין מטפחים ואין מרקדים. The Tosafot say, לדידן שרה, in our case, it is מותר. דווקא בימיהם שהיו בקיאים לעשות כלי שיר, שייך למגזר. In those days, in the days of the Mishnah, people knew how to create musical instruments by themselves with the simple tools and materials at their disposal. And therefore, when one started getting involved in any kind of musical activity, there was a hashash that a person would decide to create some kind of musical instrument. It might be a cymbal, it might be a simple kind of flute, which doesn't require very much work. You take a reed, you make a few holes, you have a flute, etc. So the Tosafot say they knew how to do this sort of thing, and there was such a hashash. So said the Tosafot. And therefore, on this basis, some have wished to matir clapping and the like, because we do not know how to make klei shir, to make any kind of musical instrument. It's not something that we would do. But all of this entire approach is based on that statement in Daf Lamed Vav in the Bavli, Shema yitaken klei shir. This statement or this explanation, this svara, is mentioned only in the Talmud Bavli. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, no such statement is made at all. And Hagaon Rabbi Shaul Lieberman in Tosefta Kipshuta proves at length that the reason for the isur of hashma'af kol, of creating some kind of noise or sound of any type of musical nature, including clapping, because clapping is used in the performance of music and singing as a group and what have you. That isur is an ancient kind of shavoth, an ancient kind of isur d'Rabbanan, which is not because of Shema yitaken klei shir. I won't go into all the details as Shaul Lieberman does over there, but I think his explanation is most convincing. I also wish to quote here the Talmud Yerushalmi, because in Talmud Yerushalmi we see very clearly that it is asur. So we have in the Talmud Yerushalmi on that Mishnah, it's in Masechet Besa Perek Hamishi Halacha Beth. It states as follows: Rabbi Yonah v'Havraya. There was once a discussion between Rabbi Yonah and some other Chachamim. Had Amar Hachen Shareh v'Hachen Asur. One opinion said to clap in this fashion is mutar and this fashion is asur. V'Horana Amar, and the other opinion stated Ben Hachen uven Hachen Asur. In both of those fashions it is asur. V'lo yadein man amar da uman amar da. But we do not really know who held which opinion. However, the Yerushalmi continues, Min Wada Amar Rabbi Yonah, but from the statement that we have of Rabbi Yonah, It Hawa Sovin Biyomenan, there used to be old Chachamim, old people, old men, wise men in our time, when I was young, in other words, Rabbi Yonah is saying. I remember older Chachamim when I was young, Wahawon Metapahin La'ahore Dehon B'Shubbata. They used to clap on the back of their hands on Shabbat. In other words, not like this, but like this. In other words, Rabbi Yonah, why did he say this? Because he was trying to say, I know from what I saw as a youngster that kind of clapping is mutar on Shabbat. So to clap on the back of one's hand like this in an unusual manner, not the usual manner, that is mutar, because it's being done b'shinui. And that way you remember that it's Shabbat. So he says, I remember when I was younger, there were older people, older Chachamim, Hawon Metapahim La'ahore Yadehon B'Shuvata. They used to clap on the back of their hands on Shabbat. Haweh Du Amar, and therefore from this we know it is he, Rabbi Yonah, who understands Hachen Shareh wa Hachen Asur. That he is the one who says of those two opinions that clapping in this fashion is mutar, but clapping in the usual fashion is asur. From this we already see that according to Rabbi Yonah, according to the other opinion, all manner of clapping is asur. There's no way that's mutar. According to Rabbi Yonah, clapping on the back of the hand is mutar. Yerushalmi continues. Rabbi Hawa Masev Rabbi Shimon Bare. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, was married. And on Shabbat, they were having apparently the Sheva Brachot, a meal, Sudat Nisuin, or Sheva Brachot. And they were clapping at this meal on the back of their hands on Shabbat. So we see in Rabbi's home, at his Sheva Brachot for his son, they were clapping in this fashion, like Rabbi Yonah said also, on the back of their hands on Shabbat. Avar Rabbi Meir was passing by. He was apparently outside, or he did not actually see what was going on, but he heard people clapping. Ushema kolahon, and he heard the sound of their clapping. Omar Rabuthenu Hutara Shabbat. He's saying, what's going on? Have you people decided that it's mutar to mahalal Shabbat? Shema Rabbi Kaleh, and Rabbi heard Rabbi Meir say this, and he said, Mi hu zeh sheba lirdothenu b'toch betenu. Who is that person? He did know Rabbi Meir outside. Apparently he was walking by in the street. Maybe he heard through the window or something. He didn't know who it was who had said that, but he heard someone say this about what was going on in his home and criticizing what was going on in his home, and as if to chastise him in his own home. So he said, who is that person who is telling us off? And there are those who say that what he said was, which is a term which apparently means to even put us in harem. In other words, to announce that we are avaryanim, that we are doing something that's asur on Shabbat. Rabbi Meir heard this and he fled. He understood that he had insulted Rabbi and he didn't want to do that. So he didn't want anyone to know who it was. So he ran. And people ran after him, apparently to call him back and to call him to come and join them, and they should see what's going on, that there wasn't what he thought it was or something like that. And Rabbi went to the window and looked outside to see who it was that had said this. And he saw Rabbi Meir running away. And because of the wind, which lifted his scarf or his headdress, he saw that it was Rabbi Meir. And it goes on to say in Yerushalmi, a very interesting statement, I believe. Odek Rabbi min kawatha, Rabbi looked through the window to the street. Wahama kadaled Rabbi Meir, he saw the back of Rabbi Meir's neck, min ahore, from behind. Amar, and he said, La zechet ana la oraitha, I was only zoche to achieve this level of Torah, ela berin dehame kadaled Rabbi Meir min ahore, because I was zoche to see the back of Rabbi Meir's neck. In other words, an expression intended to say that a personal connection with a tremendous Chacham b'Torah is a very important aspect of Limud Torah. It's part of Shimush Tamidei Chachamim. And that itself, that connection, adds to one's Chokhmah and one's Midoth and one's Yirat Shomayim. And a similar statement is then repeated here by Rabbi Yohanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And they say the same thing about Rabbi. They were the Talmidim of Rabbi, and they said, we were Zocher to Torah. Why? Berin de Hamenan es ba'afed Rabbi min gul kenin, because we saw the fingers of his hands sticking out through his cloak. At any rate, from all of this, we see two things. A, Rabbi Meir was absolutely convinced it's a asur to clap on Shabbat. It's not clear. I must state that I do not accept the perush of Bala Haridim on this sugya. It's not clear from what we hear with Rabbi Meir, because he didn't see what was going on inside the house, if he thinks it's a asur to clap in any fashion, or it's a asur to clap in the usual fashion. He may agree that it's mutar to clap on the back of one's hand, but he didn't see that, and he just thought he heard clapping, and he jumped to that conclusion. Whereas the Bala Haridim in his Perush on this Gemara in Besa Yerushalmi says that from this we see that Rabbi Meir disagreed with Rabbi Yonah. But I do not see any reason to adopt that position. It seems more reasonable to hold that if Rabbi thought it was mutar, Rabbi Meir also thought it was mutar. The difference was that he didn't see what was going on, and he mistook the reality for something else, for something that it was not. From all of this, we see that clapping on Shabbat, according to Yerushalmi, which is also the pshat of the Mishnah, is asur in the usual fashion. Clapping on the back of one's hand is mutar. That in my view is the halacha l'ma'aseh.
So, however, if clapping is asur, then it would seem that kal v'chomer that the drumming on a table is asur.
Yes, that was the next point, wasn't it? Yes, that's correct. Drumming, this is also mentioned in Yerushalmi. Drumming on a table or on a chair or any item in a manner designed to accompany singing or the like on Shabbat, that is also asur, correct. Even if it's just being done with one's hand, even if it's just on the table or on the chair or something like that, it is asur to do so. Again, this is apparently isur shavoth, atik ma'od, a very ancient isur. And I think it shows us how very careful the Hachamim, going back to a very early period, were how careful and how much thought they gave to making strict limits to that which may and may not be done on Shabbat, in order to maintain a certain and very high standard of kiddusha, of koved rosh, and an awareness of Shabbat. We also find elsewhere in Yerushalmi that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai chastised his mother, who was just chattering a lot, talking a lot on Shabbat. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai chastised his mother and told her, he said, today's Shabbat. That was just a way of reminding her that it's not a day for chattering idly. That was just talk. It wasn't music. It wasn't clapping hands. It wasn't drumming. Shabbat, gentlemen, is a very serious business. It is a muktzeh gadol b'Torah, to know how to conduct oneself on Shabbat, how to speak, what not to say, when not to speak at all. Honen not to speak about things which one should not, one is not allowed to speak on Shabbat at all. In Yanim Shel Hol, things to do with business, things to do with matters that one should not discuss on Shabbat. Shabbat is a very serious business, and Hazal were very serious. And these takanot go back to the very beginning of Beit Sheni, from what I'm able to glean from the sources. And we should therefore, all of us, take these things very seriously and not be mekel rosh.
Harav, what about knocking on a door with a door knocker that's designed to be mashmiach kol?
Okay, that's also that's a very valid and good question. In fact, there is a mahloket. I was actually going to mention that, and thank you for reminding me. There is a mahloket precisely about this. If I have the tool handy, I will quote it to you. In the tool, Bar-Hayim, Siman Shin Lamed He. The tool writes, Kol hashma'at kol asur, Rabbeinu Hananel. According to Rabbeinu Hananel, any kind of hashma'at kol is asur. Afilu eno mechaven l'shir, even if the intention has nothing to do with music or keeping time with singing or anything of the sort. Ulefi zeh, asur lehakish ala delet, afilu be'grofo. It is asur to knock on a door, even with one's fist. Afilu lefi and then he quotes Rabbeinu Meir Mirotenburg. And he quotes Rabbi Meir Mirotenburg, who says explicitly that is mutar, even using what he describes here as taba'at halula, even some kind of metal object or hollow metal object which is designed to make noises, but you don't need that particular sound. It's not like a cymbal. You create a cymbal which you then strike in order to produce a certain sound. A door knocker is not designed to produce a specific sound as opposed to another sound, which you don't want. All you want is a noise so that people will know that you're at the door. So the fact is, there is a mahloket in the Talmud about knocking on the door. According to essentially all the Rishonim, it is mutar. As the Torah here quotes, he quotes the Rif, he quotes Rabbeinu Tam, the Avi HaEzri, etc. This is the maskana. It is mutar to knock on the door, even though there is an opinion in both Talmudim that is asur, but the halakha ma'aseh is that it is mutar. It's also possible that there's more room to say that it's asur according to the Yerushalmi than according to the Bavli. And this is why the Rif at the end of Eruvin discusses this very question of Bavli versus Yerushalmi. But nevertheless, halakha ma'aseh, it is, I think, correct to say it is mutar to knock on a door, even with some kind of device, if the intention is simply to create some noise, any noise, in order that people know that you're at the door, and not to create a particular kind of sound.
Thank you, Harav. Is David Newman on the line? I don't see a David. Nope. Okay. Next question is from Leon in Berkeley. What is one not allowed to ask for on Shabbat in tefilla, and how far is this idea to be taken? As an example, is one allowed to say the supplications mentioned in Bavli Brachot 16b and 17a at the end of the Amidah on Shabbat?
All right, this is a very good and practical question. The standard practice, most people, if you check, you will see that most people say Elokai Nesolo Shoni Mera on Shabbat, as they do every other day of the week at the end of the tefillah. But the truth is, it's not at all so straightforward and obvious that it is mutar. I will quote an interesting source that we have in the Or Zarua, Rabbeinu Yitzhak Rabbi Moshe Mivina, Bal Or Zarua, one of the very important Rishonim. He was the Rav of Marami Rothenburg, who was the Rav of the Rosh. So in Hilchot Muktze Shabbat, Siman Pei Faith, Oth Gimel, he brings precisely this discussion of what one can say and what one cannot say. And he quotes the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi states in Perek Teth Wav, chapter 15 of the Yerushalmi, Sechet Shabbat. There, a very interesting question is asked, and we are familiar with this text. It says, is it mutar? One asks the other, is it mutar to say, Ro'enu parnasenu on Shabbat? Now, this obviously is referring to Birkat HaMazon, which, by the way, proves that nusach was part of Birkat HaMazon in Eretz Yisrael at that time. And as the Ramban writes in his Hilushim on Masechet Shabbat, it's clear that they said these words in the first baracha of Birkat HaMazon, Birkat Hazan. And the answer given in Yerushalmi there is that it's mutar, mishum shetofes barachot kachu, because it is part of the baracha that one always says in Birkat HaMazon. It's included within the text of the baracha. It is mutar to say so, even though there's a certain bakasha involved. Why would we think it's not mutar to say such a thing on Shabbat? Because after all, instead of the 18 brachot that we say every day, the Nevi'im and the Hachamim deliberately instructed us not to say all the 18 brachot, to drop the 12 middle brachot, to say the first 3 and the last 3, and in the middle we have one baracha in place of all those other brachot. So all those bakashot, all those tahinot, all those requirements that we have, we do not mention on Shabbat. So you would have been quite at liberty to assume that any kind of bracha, any kind of bakasha rather, is a surah. So the Yerushalmi says, if it is part of a bracha that you are nevertheless required to say, but it happens to include such a term or such an expression, is mutar to say so. But this also implies that if it is not part of a bracha that you are at any nevertheless required to say, then it is also to say any kind of bakasha, any kind of tahina. Now here in the Or Zarua, on the basis of this Yerushalmi, he says, "Wa al ze anu samechim shanu mitparelim b'Shabbat Elohai nasor l'shonim era." Hanameh tofes tefilla kenhu. The reason that we say this on Shabbat, says the Or Zarua, from this you see that he was of the opinion that you do say it on Shabbat, is because it is part of the bracha, part of the tefillah. Now in a book called Imrei Noam, which is a collection of hidushim and statements of the Gra, written down by his Talmidim on Masechet Barachot, in Imrei Noam it states on this point that the Gra said it is only mutar to say this, Elokai Nasor Shorim Era, etc., if you have not yet said, as long as one has not recited that pasuk, one is still considered to be in tefillah. That is the ending of tefillah. As soon as you say the beginning, that you're already in tefillah, even before you say Baruch. As soon as you say Yul Rason at the end, you have finished the tefillah. So if you say Yul Rason first and then Elokai Nathor, that's not good, says the Gra, because now it's no longer part of the bracha. It's no longer Tofes Barachot. It's no longer part of the Shema Esrei that you were saying. It's now a separate bakasha, and that you cannot say on Shabbat. I have a book which I will show you here, which is Sidur Hagra HaShalem B'Nigleh V'Nistar. Don't know if you can really see that. At the end, there is a kuntres by Hagan Rabbi Sraya Divletsky Zetzal, whom I knew from Bnei Barak. In Oth Ayin Heth, it says here, it mentions this discussion, and on the On the next page, it quotes from a book called Toldot Eliyahu, which is a book about the Gra Mikalish, Rabbeinu Agon Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mikalish. It says explicitly that his minhag was not to say Elokai Nathor on Shabbat Bichlal. And explains in this footnote why that position makes a lot of halachic sense. So even though we have a number of Rishonim, I just quoted one of those Rishonim to you, the Or Zarua, from whom we understand that they did say it on Shabbat. First of all, we have to be clear, it is reasonable, possibly, to claim that it is mutar to say that additional tefillah at the end of the tefillah, even on Shabbat, on condition that one did not say Yehud Rasolim Refi first. Now, most people do. Most people finish the bracha, they say the last bracha of the tefillah, or say shalom, shalom, then they say Yehud Rason, and then they say Elokai Nathor, something like that. That is definitely not a good idea. If one immediately then after the bracha, one recites Elokai Nathor, and only then Yehud Rason, there is room to say that it's mutar. My personal feeling, however, is and this is what I've done for decades essentially. I do not recite Elokai Nathor L'Shonim Merah on Shabbat Bichlal in any tefillah. It does not make sense to me at all that the Hachamim, the Nevi'im, when mevatel 12 barachot mitoch 18, that they told us not to recite a whole large section of the 18 on Shabbat, but that we should, of our own volition, add all of a sudden some tefillah, some bakasha, even though it's a very beautiful tefillah, and it's always a wonderful thing to say, but not right now, not on Shabbat. You can say it all week long before Shabbat and immediately after Shabbat. On Shabbat, I don't know why there should be any particular reason to recite any bakasha or any tahina at all. The Gra was particularly, shall we say, sensitive about reciting tahinot and bakashot of all kinds on Shabbat. There are quite a few examples that we could mention. We could mention a tefillah l'shlomo Medina, as some people say. We could mention Yakub Purkan, and we could mention Avarahamim, all kinds of things. And these things are mentioned, not the tefillah l'shlomo Medina, but Avarahamim and Yakub Purkan are mentioned in Maaseh Rav as things that Gra was not in favor of saying on Shabbat. So my personal suggestion is not to say any tahina or any bakasha on Shabbat, and this includes Elokai Nathor.
Thank you, Harav. Leon, do you have anything to be clarified there?
No, thank you very much, Harav.
If I could ask Harav, is there anything that one should say instead of Elokai Shema, such as Vayvarach David, that are seen in some places, or any other passage?
I have not seen such a practice written anywhere. You have seen it?
It's in Rav Yair Shaki Siddur.
I see. I haven't seen that, but these are pesukim from Divrei Yamim. These are nice tefillot, beautiful pesukim. I do not see any reason, as long as it doesn't have any tahina or bakasha, I don't see any reason why one should not say so.
Thank you. So should in practice the tefillah should end Oseh Shalom and then straight to the Yehud,
and that's it, and you're finished. I see someone asked the question on Muktze Shabbat, is it okay to say Wuhurahu? Yes, because if it's already Shabbat is out, it's mutar.
On this topic, the Shulchan Aruch says that if one began the bracha honen, according to the common nusach, then one should continue it. This has always seemed a little bit strange to me, but it seems to be based on the assumption. It's clearly based on the assumption that the reason why we don't say these middle 12 brachot is because of tircha de sibura. What's the Rav's opinion on this, and what should one do if one mistakenly starts that bracha?
Begins that first bracha tahonen or honantano or something like that, one should complete that bracha, because that is discussed before us in the Talmud. Not because it's dafka because of tirahada thibura, but because one began the bracha, and one should not stop in the middle. So one should complete that bracha. And after all, bakashat da'ath is even questioned by some of the chachamim why that bracha was left out of the tefillah of Shabbat, because it's bracha, it's something that is ra'ui, that's something that you would think we would want to ask for always, even on Shabbat. But mi anachnu, me anu, or me hayenu, if the Nevi'im and the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah said not to say that, even that bracha or honen da'ath on Shabbat, so obviously anachnu mekabelim, and we nakitna b'shipulei glimayho, we follow in their footsteps and we grab onto the skirts of their cloak.
Thank you. And things that come up in tefillah, I mean, the Rav mentioned a few of them, but one that came to mind was Birkat HaChodesh, the Yehira Son, and the other tefillot that many communities say that seem to be quite very, very similar to what one would say during the week. Should one say those?
Again, it is the common practice that it is said, but the Gra did not approve of this, and it's, I would think, impossible essentially to reconcile that practice with the well-known Isur that we just mentioned now of not reciting Tahilot and Bakashot. So I have always found it a strange practice myself.
May one say Amen to the Kahal's tefillot in that part of the tefillah?
I do not think it's reasonable to say that it's asur to answer Amen, but I think it would be better were it not said.
Thank you, Harav. We have another question. We have a question now from Daniel Philrice in Queens, New York. What is the Rav's position regarding transitions glasses on Shabbat, which change color as a chemical reaction to the presence or absence of sunlight? Can one wear them on Shabbat?
It is mutar, in my view, to wear such glasses on Shabbat. It is a davar she'eino mitkawen. You're walking around, let's say you're in your house, you have your glasses on, you walk outside and you walk into the sunlight, into the brighter light, and perhaps the shade of the lens changes, but you were not intending for that to happen. It's something which happens by itself, and it has nothing to do necessarily with your own action. In other words, if you were to leave those glasses on your desk in your room, and in the morning there's little light in your bedroom, but later in the day the sun shifts around and your room is flooded with sunlight, that lens, those glasses will change color anyhow, whether you're wearing them or not. It's not up to you. It's not entirely, does not hinge on what you do or do not do, whether you wear them or not. So for all those reasons, it is mutar to wear such glasses on Shabbat.
Okay. Thank you, Harav. Daniel, are you here? No. Okay. The next question is anonymous. When I visit my non-observant parents for Shabbat, one of them might accidentally turn on the light in my room on Friday night. Then, remembering that I have to sleep there, they will sometimes turn it off without a second thought, but not necessarily unintentionally. If this happens, may I still sleep in my room since the light was originally off on Shabbat? Or would that be benefiting from a Jew's malacha? And does it matter what kind of light bulbs my lamp uses?
Well, technically it might matter. It may be of some import what kind of light bulb we are discussing, but more importantly, we're talking about a hama'ah she'en bo mamash. In other words, the isur of being nehene mi melechet Shabbat refers to, the classic example is a Jew cooked food on Shabbat. Are you allowed to benefit from that food? What does that mean, to benefit? To eat it. To eat food is a clear and obvious hama'ah and benefit. And then we have various halachot. Who cooked it? For what reason? For how long? On Shabbat, after Shabbat, etc. Hana'ah from Melechet Shabbat has to do with something tangible. if light was on in the room and now there is no light in the room, there is nothing tangibly different about it. It's not the hana'ah that you receive. It may be more convenient for you if the light is off. It'd be easier and more pleasant for you to sleep in that room, perhaps. But I do not think that can or should be defined as a hana'ah mimelechet Shabbat. It is obviously a good idea to try and explain to one's parents or one's hosts, whoever they may be, that you should refrain from either turning on or off the lights in that room on Shabbat, just to make things simple for everybody, and not involve me in any such anguish or having to think about such things. But if in practice it happened, I don't think it's so to sleep in that room on Shabbat.
Thank you, Harav. We have a question now from Shimon Hecht. Can one be Yosei Yodei Chovat Kiddush and Seudah in a Shabbat meal without eating bread at all? If yes, does one need to say Birkat Hamazon on the meal?
This is a question that I have been asked over the recent years a number of times, because we all know that there are more and more people. It's still, I think, a small minority of people, but there are more and more people who find, for different reasons, that eating bread is not good for them. It may have to do with an allergy, a gluten sensitivity, etc. This has to do, by the way, with the fact that most wheat and wheat flour that is available today is actually from genetically modified wheat, and the gluten content is different and greater than it used to be in old-fashioned wheat, even as recently as 100 odd years ago, apparently. So I understand. This is the reason, apparently, for the increase in people's sensitivity on the part of some people. So it has to be understood. Seudah on Shabbat is a chovah, but it's also part of the miswah of oner Shabbat. If a person does not enjoy eating bread, in fact, it causes them discomfort, shall we say, not to mention outright pain or illness, a person is not required to eat any food any day of the year, essentially, unless we're perhaps talking about Korban Pesach or something like that. And even then, you only have to eat a kazayit of basar. So even if you don't like meat, you probably can eat a kazayit of basar and leave it at that. But a person does not have to eat food which causes him discomfort, sickness, pain, etc. So the same is true of eating meat, by the way. There was a mitzvah to lechabedet haShabbat, la'aneget haShabbat, to have meat and fish and what have you. But if a person says, for me, it's the opposite. I really do not like meat. It is the opposite of onik Shabbat for me. He's not required to eat meat. And the same is true for bread. If a person really does not enjoy the experience of eating bread on Shabbat, he cannot get a different kind of bread, then he does not have to eat bread. Although I would say again that there is a chovah to likbo'a seudah al path on Shabbat. The requirement is really just a kazayit. A kazayit is a very small amount. To be precise, 3 cc. 3 cc is less than a teaspoon. So if a person can eat 1 kazayit of bread and leave it at that, and that is something that a person can handle, then I would say eat a kazayit each of the 3 meals, and the rest of the meal have whatever it is that you wish. I would just add one caveat to that, and that is if you intend to eat just a small amount of bread and leave it at that, and then the rest of the meal consists of other foods, then you have to make a baracha on those other foodstuffs. So if it's going to be rice, you say borei pri adama, or according to others, borei minei mezonot. If you're going to have chicken, then you say shakol, etc. According to whatever foodstuff it is that you wish to eat. You cannot rely on the baracha for bread if you do not intend to eat bread beyond a tiny amount. If one does not want to eat bread at all, and it really bothers a person, then I think it is mutar not to eat bread at a Seudah on Shabbat. Although, again, my recommendation is to eat a kazayit and leave it at that. If you can do that, that's probably the best thing to do. But if that's really not desirable, not feasible, unpleasant, then you're not hayav. With regards to Birkat Hamazon, that's a separate question. the standard halacha is that one does not recite Birkat Hamazon on a meal which does not include bread. Rabbi Akiva, as we know from the Mishnah in Masechet Berachot, was of the view that if a person makes his meal of other foodstuffs, and that's what he has, then he says Birkat Hamazon. This is not the standard halacha. And yet, I will, shall we say, go beyond what appears in most halachic texts, and I will say here that I think that if a person, and today it is becoming more and more common, as I said before, in the time of Rabbi Akiva, it was a rare thing that a person did not have any any bread at his meal. Today, there are more and more people who do actually behave in this way, do conduct themselves in this fashion, and it's no longer such a rarity. And I think that's a further reason to at least to say that the view of Rabbi Akiva may be acted upon, and one can say Birkat Hamazon on a meal based on other foodstuffs.
Okay, thank you. Shimon, did you have anything to be clarified there?
The Rav, I just wanted to understand. So if a person just makes kiddush without eating any bread, and he eats a whole meal, then he should say Birkat Hamazon, if I understood correctly.
One could say simply the bracha ahrona for wine and for the other foodstuffs. That would be the standard halachic position. I'm saying, I think nowadays it's mutar to halakha ma'aseh to act upon the view of Rabbi Akiva and to say Birkat Hamazon for a whole meal, a serious meal, even if there was no bread in that meal.
Thank you very much, Rav.
To clarify, is the Rav saying that ideally we should all do that every time we have a steak and chips, or just those who, for medical reasons, never eat bread or rarely eat bread?
No, it's not. This is not a psak halacha for those with allergies or disorders or what have you. I think it makes sense to say nowadays, particularly that even more than in ancient times, that a person may say Birkat Hamazon on a fixed a real meal, which might be, as you say, steak and chips and a salad or whatever. If it's a real meal, I think it's mutar to say Birkat Hamazon. I'm not saying one has to. I'm saying I think it is mutar to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Yehoshua Ben Zadon in Madrid and London. Will a loaf of bread that is then toasted be considered shalem as it changes status and then become fitting to be used as lechem mishneh on Shabbat?
The question, I'm afraid, is not clear to me. Because if we're talking about bread that was edible, entirely edible before it was toasted, I assume we're talking about toasting it on Shabbat. If it was edible before Shabbat, then it has not, you could claim perhaps that it has not really changed, although you could also make the argument that it's a sort of toast, to really toast bread on Shabbat. It would be theliyah aharafiyah. But if we're talking about bread that was edible before, that would be one thing. But if we're talking about something that was not edible before it was then toasted on Shabbat, that's a vadaya sort to toast it on Shabbat. So if that's the question, I'm not really sure I understand.
However, I think it's I think he's asking about whether if all of this was done before Shabbat, is about whether it is considered shalem for the purpose of lechem mishneh rather than whether it's a melacha.
Again, I'm not sure I understand. What are we talking about? Taking a pita, shall we say, 2 pitot that you bought Friday morning, and you want to eat them crispy and toasty after kiddush. So you put them on top of the plata or something, or into the oven, and you pull them out and then make hamutzi on them when they are warm and somewhat toasted. So why?
I think he's saying it was toasted when Shabbat came in, and his question is whether either it's whether toasting it prevents it from being shalem, or whether I think that's what he's asking, whether because it's toasted it's no longer shalem.
How does toasting contradict it being shalem? Either it's shalem or it's not shalem.
Yeah.
you can toast something which is shalem, or you can cut it in half and then toast it, in which case it wasn't shalem when you toasted it. So I'm not sure I understand why shalem and toasting are mutually exclusive.
Okay.
I do not think that the act of toasting it or making something crispy, shall we say, changes its status so that it cannot be used for lechem mishneh. Absolutely not. Lechem mishneh can be more crispy and toasty, and it can be less so.
Okay. Thank you. I will try and clarify that question with him. The next question is from Benjamin Lemkin in Ramat Bet Shemesh. Is it permissible during Shabbat to change the settings of a standard shot on Shabbat such that the light will not go on at a scheduled time?
So I understand that the question is as follows. If, for example, you had your Sha'on Shabbat, your Shabbat clock set so that the light would come on at 10 o'clock in the morning, and now for whatever reason you wish the light to come on only at 12 o'clock rather than at 10 o'clock, is it mutar to change the setting of the Sha'on Shabbat so that it will come on only later? The answer is yes.
Thank you, Benjamin.
I mean, the answer you gave also applies to what I intended, which was, what if you simply didn't want it to go on at all?
In other words, you had the Sha'on Shabbat, the automatic clock set up in such a way that the light would come on at some point during the Shabbat, and you decide now that it's not necessary for this light to come on at all. So you push in the plastic pieces or whatever they are. You do something to it so that it will not come on at all at any point during the Shabbat or any time for the remainder of Shabbat. Again, the answer is that it is mutar.
Right, and regarding the answer, let's say those thingies, whatever they are, that are pressed down, let's say they were pressed down so that the electricity would go on between 10 and 12. So I understand from the Rav's answer that if one decides that one does not want as extensive a period to be with electricity, one can change the settings for between 10 and 11 so it comes on, even if it's consecutive between 10 and 12. It's been set to be consecutively on from 10 to 12. One can change the period, let's say from 10 to 11, so it won't be on, so that it only goes on when it's 11.
It was supposed to go on at 10 and go off at 12?
Yes.
And now you want it to come on at 10 and go off at 11?
No, I want it to go on at 11 as opposed to going on at 10.
Okay, so that is mutar. If you wish to change it so that instead of switching on at 10, it will switch on at 11, that is mutar.
Right. But the other way around of making it come on earlier than planned would be asur.
The other way around is already much more hotly debated amongst modern day poskim.
Okay, thank you. We have a question now from Mayor Morozov in Jerusalem. What does the Rav's Havdala look like? So there's a few parts to this. The first part is it preferable to say the customary introductory passage?
All right. Well, I can tell you as follows, and perhaps what we shall do in the not too distant future is send out a text for Havdala as I recite it. First of all, there's no fixed or halachic whether one must say Havdala except for the basics of Havdala. In other words, to say the bracha on the wine, on the besamim, on the ner, and then the brikat Havdala. All the rest are bivchinat minhag. The psukim that I say and have said for many years is as follows. I say, Hina el Yeshu'ati abtah v'lo al-had, Yu'azir v'zim rafiyah Adonai v'yihini Yeshu'ah, v'shavten mai usason, v'ma'inah Yeshu'ah, Adonai ha-Yeshu'ah, ala mecha v'ilchotecha salam. Adonai sabot imanu, miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov salam. Adonai tzada'ot ashrei adam b'tayah bach, Adonai Hoshia, ha-malach ya'alenu v'yom korenu. layehudim hayta ra v'simcha v'sason v'yikar ken tiyeh lanu. And then I go on to say, وَهِذَا وِذْ لَخَلْ دَرَخَلْ وَسْكِيل وَذُنَعِمُ كَنْ يَعِمُونُ أَنَا أَذُنَاي هُشِيعْنَا أَنَا أَذُنَاي هَصْلِحَنَا لِشُعَفِخَا كِوِثِ أَذُنَاي كَوْسِ شُعَوْث أَسَاب شَمْ أَذُنَاي أَكْرَى. I say the bracha Borei Pri Agafen, and then the bracha on besamim and on the ner, Borei Minei besamim or Borei Aseh besamim, Borei Morei Ha'esh, and then the bracha on Birkat Havdala. The bracha for the nusach of the bracha of Havdala, I say the same nusach, I think that almost everybody says, with the difference perhaps of one word. In other words, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Ha'olam Hamavdil Ben Kodesh Lehol Ben Or Lehoshech Ben Yisrael LaGoyim ביום השבעי לששת ימי המעשה ברוך אתה השם המבדיל בין קודש לחול. I know that in some versions of nusach Eretz Yisrael you find nuschaot such as ben tomel tahor ben mayim ha'ilyonim lemayim ha'tachtonim ben kohanim levuyim u'yisraelim, etc. I'm not saying it's wrong at all to say these things, but I do not see any benefit to adding these statements to Birkat Havdala.
Thank you, Harav. Should one pause for the others to cite layehudim?
If other people are reciting, they don't have to recite the pasuk, but if that's what people are doing, then wait for them, yes.
Is it a good minhag that everyone should join in for that word, for that? I guess it's harmless, but
it's vaday harmless, but it's more than harmless. In other words, if Jews wish to recite a pasuk, why should we get in their way? It's a davar mod yefeh. So if people want to say the pasuk, if that's their practice, mitzuyan. So wait a moment.
Someone asked, does the Rav sit or stand for Havdala?
I sit both for kiddush belel Shabbat. This is also what the Rama writes in the Shulchan Aruch. This was the minhag of the Ashkenazim Tamid, and some of the Ekim to this day. The Gra explicitly says to sit for kiddush. This is Leil Shabbat, Kal Vahomer, Shabbat morning, and for Havdala. I sit for all of the above. I see no rhyme or reason to stand for any of these miswot. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Thank you. And the next part of the question was, what items are the best to use as besamim?
Whatever a person prefers as besamim, that is the ideal thing. If a person likes to take a sprig of hadassim or some other leafy plant and make the relevant bracha, that's what they like. That's wonderful. If a person likes cloves, b'vakasha, whatever a person, it's really a matter of preference. There's no reason to go for one over the other.
Okay, and the next question was, the next part of this was, is it correct to take a long time over Havdala in order to delay the exit of Shabbat?
If the person asking the question means to say, should one recite Havdala slowly, then I think yes, one should recite everything that one says slowly. Because Hamazon, Havdala, kiddush, all these things should be said slowly. The word should be said slowly, clearly, no rush. It should be a joy to say these things, but to take an unreasonably long time to say any of these things is also unnecessary. As for saying Havdalah at the right time, obviously one waits till it is clearly beyond Shabbat. When Shabbat is clearly over, only then one says Havdalah.
And then the final part of the question was, does the Rav have any special minhagim for Havdala?
Beyond what I have just explained on the Pesukim that I recited, etc.? No.
Thank you. Just do we have Mayor on the line? I don't think so. So I just wanted to ask actually about the minhag of looking at one's fingernails in the Aish. Should one do something like that in order to actively benefit from the light? either with
All right.
one's hands or with something else, or is it enough just to passively benefit?
This is a good question, and actually, I have to take back what I just said. Are there any other special minhagim? In other words, what I have always done for Havdala is to turn off almost all the lights in the house or in the room where we're making Havdala, so that there is very, very little light, so that the light of the candle is very perceptible and beneficial. So you're neheneh min haor. The bracha boreh noreh ha'esh is to be said over a light from which you are gaining benefit. If the lights are all on, the light of the candle is more or less batel. It's not really felt, and there's no significance. So I always have the lights turned off, and just leave maybe one light off somewhere off to the side, so that essentially we're in semi-darkness basically. And then the lighting of the candle is mashma'uti. It is significant. It lights up the room. And when that is the case, you do not need to put your hands or your fingernails or anything in the way of the light. The idea there is that if there is other light, you should somehow benefit from the candle on which you're making the bracha. So that if you put your fingers next to the candle and you view your nails, then you can say that you are neheneh min ha'or, because you were able to observe your nails or something like that more precisely because of the light of that candle. But if you do as I'm suggesting, you switch off the lights first, so that the light of the candle on which you're making the bracha is obviously benefiting you, then you do not need to look at your fingernails or anything else in particular.
Thank you, Harav. I think the next question is from Dov Teichman in Cedarhurst, New York.
I saw
Sorry.
someone asked a question about overflowing wine and the like. I personally do not like the minhag of wasting wine. I think it is bal tashchit to overfill the cup, or to use wine to extinguish the candle, or to pour the wine over one's fingers, which definitely smacks of darchei ha'emori, or all manner of superstition. Wine is not to be wasted. It is to be drunk, is to be enjoyed. It is to be used for various miswot, etc. I do not recommend using wine for any of those purposes. And I do not overfill my Havdala cup.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Dov Teichman in Cedarhurst, New York. This is a question that the Rav has dealt with at length in other places. So it's how can one determine the correct time for Seta Kochvim and Motzei Shabbat and in general? So I think the question here would be, in practical terms, how many minutes after the Shkia should one wait?
Understood. The problem, of course, is that one cannot really answer that question in terms of minutes, because it varies from place to place. Here in Eretz Yisrael, for example, even in the middle of summer, according to Rav Tukhchinsky, and I think he is entirely correct, there is never a time on Motzei Shabbat that you need to wait more than 28 minutes till Motzei Shabbat. So he writes. Whereas in New York, Agona Moshe Feinstein writes in Roth Moshe that even in the summer, it's never more than 50 minutes. There's a big difference between 28 minutes and 50 minutes. I was once in the middle of summer in Budapest, in Hungary. And on Shabbat, I saw that Shlosha Kochavim were visible exactly 1 hour after sunset, which is exactly double the time that it took in Yerushalayim. So you cannot really speak in a meaningful way to this question if you speak in about minutes. It depends where you are. In astronomical scientific terms, the point at which a person can observe 3 stars, Shlosha Kochavim Benoniyim, is a function of the number of degrees below the horizon where the sun is at a given moment. And based on my calculations and having looked into this, and based on what Rambam writes, which I will quote very, very quickly. Rambam writes in Hilchot Terumoth, Perek Zayin, I'll quote it precisely. One moment. Rambam speaks about tameim, people who are tameh eating teruma, kohanim who are tameh, who may only eat teruma when they become tahor. This is only the case, as Rambam, this is in Perek Zayin Halacha Bet, ad sheya'arivu shimshan, until the day is over, the sun sets, וَيَسَّעُ שלושה כוכבים בינוניים, and Rambam adds, وَزَا هَعَثْ كَمُو شَلِيش شَعَى أَهَرْ شَكِيعَةَ الْحَمَى. This is approximately a third of an hour after the sun sets. Now, obviously, this refers to Eretz Israel or countries nearby. A third of an hour is 20 minutes. My observations over many, many years, in fact decades, has convinced me that Rambam's statement is entirely accurate and precise. On an average day of the year, 20 minutes after the sun sets, 3 stars on the average day, which is around Chodesh Nisan and Chodesh Tishrei, 3 stars are visible. So the question is, how many degrees below the horizon is the sun when at that time in Eretz Israel? And the answer is, based on everything I have been able to ascertain, is that the sun at that point is 5.245 degrees below the horizon. 5.245 degrees below the horizon. At that point, the ambient light decreases to the point where you can see 3 stars. And the same applies in other parts of the world as well. When the sun is that many degrees below the horizon, all other factors being equal, you should be able to see 3 stars. Now, it could be in Norway in the middle of summer, that may happen only at 1 o'clock in the morning, quite literally. In fact, based on my one-time experience in Norway at that time of year, I can tell you that I was not convinced I could see 3 stars even at 1:30 in the morning. But maybe you could at that time. Maybe if you have better eyesight than I did, maybe. But so it all depends because of the angle of the sun and how much it is below the horizon. It's complicated. But if a person wants to talk in astronomical terms, those are the figures.
Thank you, Harav. This is actually Davka more of a weekday issue than a Shabbat issue. But in the summer, in many shuls in Eretz Yisrael, shuls will Davka daven Arvith, not Davka, will daven Arvith 20-25 minutes after Shkia. And I've mentioned that it could be as Sheta Kokobin could be as late as 28 minutes.
In the middle of the summer, 20 minutes is too early. 20 minutes is also it's still a little bit too early. In the middle of the summer, if it's 26, 27 minutes, is probably already okay, because Rav Tukchinsky was speaking about Shlosha Kochavim Benonim plus a certain Tosefet. But 20 minutes in the summer in Eretz Yisrael is too brief. That's true. In the winter, it's fine.
My question would be, whether when you do have a shul that doesn't say 25 minutes after Shkia in the middle of June, is those 2-3 minutes important enough that one should not say Kriyat Shema with them and say it later, or do we have the leeway of 2 or 3 minutes?
Of course, it's very difficult to answer this question because it really can depend whether it's the beginning of June or the beginning of July. It really can change significantly over a period of even 10 days. But if one is unsure that it is Sefer Kochavim, I personally would not say Kriyat Shema with the brachot at that time. I would wait till later.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, Please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.